Kanto is admittedly not a very interesting place. The route diversity is almost non-existent, the gym leaders and other bosses are absolute pushovers, and while I don't dislike any of the Pokemon designs themselves, the actual variety is pretty lackluster for most of the game, leaving you with very little options for early team building. And with Fire Red being at the forefront of ROM hacking for almost 2 decades, we've seen a lot of Kanto. But a lot of people, including myself, look back fondly at the first region, wishing it hadn't aged the way it did. So in this video, I'll be going over 5 Pokemon ROM hacks that make the effort to significantly improve the Kanto experience. Most of them have new stories and graphics, with a few just improving the base game, without an overwhelming number of new features. I'll also be doing the same thing for Johto and Hoenn, so make sure you subscribe to not miss out on either of those. The first hack we're going to take a look at is basically an extremely polished version of Fire Red and Leaf Green. This is Pokemon Recharged Yellow, and while it might not look very intriguing at first, I promise you it's not your normal enhancement hack. First of all, this hack comes with a plethora of graphical enhancements, such as improved UIs, color variations for Pokemon, and of course, following Pokemon, because why not? But it gets even better with a ton of quality of life features, such as a battle speed up option built right into the hack, something that's become one of my favorite features in ROM hacking, as you can now enjoy the music and sounds without having to play on the miserably slow speed of the Generation 3 games. But of course, that's not all, as you'll also start the game with access to different challenge modes, such as harder battles or an optional level cap, as well as an extra experience mode and Nuzlocke mode, offering multiple ways to enjoy your playthrough. It is still the same story, and the same roster of Pokemon, but that's kind of why I like it, and why it belongs here. It doesn't try to add tons of Pokemon that don't belong in Kanto, and instead just improves the original experience. So I think it goes without saying that Recharged Yellow is probably the best way to enjoy Fire Red and Leaf Green without changing too much about the games. Now, if you're a longtime fan of my content, you know that I don't particularly care for ROM hacks that don't change the graphics, story, or region. However, this one seemed to have a much different design philosophy than most of the copies of Radical Red I see popping up every week. This is Pokemon Yellow Legacy, and like the previous hack, it doesn't try to add modern day Pokemon, items, moves, or gimmicks, and instead looks to improve what's already there, with a goal of keeping the first generation of Pokemon feeling similar to their original incarnations. If you don't know what I mean, then let's take a dive into the features. First, despite what I said before, the hack does add a lot of features from the second and third generations, like the running shoes, unique party icons, a female player option, and just a lot of things that really should have been in the original games. But the real charm of this hack comes from the Pokemon and difficulty changes. Every Pokemon has some kind of improvement to their learn sets, and some even having their stats increased as well. However, the way Pokemon are buffed in this hack feels quite unique compared to others, because rather than giving them a boatload of new moves varying in types, they're instead given a handful of additional ones, with their original options being made available earlier. And rather than adding new moves to make up for the large number of weaker ones, those weaker moves have simply been buffed. I have to say that despite how empty Generation 1 feels, especially with my personal lack of nostalgia for it, this hack definitely made for quite the interesting experience, and is probably one of the best Pokemon Yellow ROM hacks out there. But let's be honest, I'm sure you're tired of playing through the same plot of Fire Red and Leaf Green. So the next 3 hacks will take you through Kanto with new and unique stories. The first one is Pokemon Adventure Red, a ROM hack that follows the story of the original Pokemon Adventures manga. Having never read it myself, I can't exactly confirm how accurate it was, but that also didn't stop me from enjoying the game. You'll play as Red, the main protagonist of the story that's split up into over 60 chapters, taking place across both Kanto and the Orange Archipelago. The story is pretty good, but what I think really carries it is both the character portraits and cutscenes that convey plot points without just using walls of text. But the story isn't the only thing that's been upgraded, as the region of Kanto has also been updated to the Generation 4 art style. Most of the maps, especially the towns and cities, are pretty well made, but there were a handful of them that just felt like mazes of wild encounters. But I'll be honest, the hack is pretty lacking when it comes to the Pokemon side of gameplay. The encounters and balance aren't very different from the original Gen 3 and 4 iterations of the region, so outside of the story-based encounters, building a full team of cool Pokemon might take a while, but that might not be a problem to a lot of people, considering just how easy the game is. It's still Kanto, and a lot of the gym leaders and other bosses can easily be dealt with by just bringing a type matchup counter. Overall, the game offers a really long story that, despite some cringe and maybe weird moments, is a fun read. If every hack shown in this video so far had one thing in common, outside of just taking place in Kanto, it would be that you're playing as a Pokemon trainer on a journey to collect 8 gym badges and be the very best. And that's exactly the story of this next hack, except you aren't playing as the protagonist of the series, but instead as a member of Team Rocket. In Fire Red Rocket Edition, you'll get to see a much darker version of Kanto, through the eyes of the region's biggest criminal organization. The story is really good, and I like how much effort was put into making the region feel a lot more realistic. But my favorite part of the game was probably the stealing mechanic. Rather than picking up a special starter and catching new ones to build your team, you'll instead steal Pokemon from trainers you defeat. So yeah, your party might not look the greatest starting out, but as you rise through the ranks, you'll eventually be able to start stealing stronger ones. And while the game's graphics and layout do resemble that of the original Fire Red and Leaf Green, the battle mechanics have been updated to the 6th generation, bringing in the physical special split and the fairy type. You'll also get access to Fly the moment you get a Pokemon, and cave and water encounter rates have been significantly reduced, making the region a lot easier to traverse, so you can focus a lot more on the story and Pokemon battles. Overall, Rocket Edition is really good, and probably one of the best written Pokemon ROM hacks ever made. Before we continue, I did want to include 2 additional hacks that don't exactly fit into this list, but I thought were at least worth mentioning. The first one is Team Rocket Edition. Like the previous hack, you'll once again play as a Rocket Grunt during the events of the original protagonist's story. But there are a lot of things that separate this one from the previous Team Rocket hack I just talked about. First of all, your story begins in the Sevi Islands, instead of the Kanto region, and there's even a bigger story arc in that region as well. But the biggest difference is the lack of the stealing mechanic, where you'll instead build your team like you would in the normal Pokemon games. But it still shares similar features, like the physical special split and updated battle mechanics, and still has an interesting story. So if you enjoyed Fire Red Rocket Edition, then you'll definitely enjoy this hack as well. The second one is Fire Red Extended, and I'll first be honest that this hack isn't great, but it does have 2 things in particular that I really enjoy. First of all, the entire region of Kanto has been remade, with new maps and updated graphics, for both the overworld and battle scene. It even adds a plethora of new routes and towns to give the player so much more to do. Secondly, a variety of learn set changes have been made to every Pokemon, so you can easily build a team out of whatever you want. But that's kind of where it ends, because while I'm not bothered by the lack of a new story or new characters, the difficulty is very boring. Sure, the gym leaders and other bosses will give you some trouble, but there's still an insane amount of random filler trainers that all feel like a waste of time to battle, with tons of Pokemon that are incredibly underleveled. It's a great concept for a ROM hack that just wasn't executed very well, but it still has Pokemon from all 9 generations and quality of life features like the EXP, so I guess you could enjoy it if you don't mind any of the flaws I talked about. And finally, is a hack that many people consider to be one of the best ways to experience Kanto. This is Pokemon Dark Violet, and despite it being an older ROM hack released all the way back in 2012, it's received various updates, keeping it from falling into a state of outdatedness. Like Adventure Red Chapter, Dark Violet is a very story-focused game, with tons of new characters and plot points. But I did personally enjoy this hack's plot a lot more, as it took itself a lot more seriously and delivered an antagonist group that actually felt threatening. But the story isn't all this hack has to offer, as the entire region has been remapped, with the map layouts based on Heart Gold and Soul Silver, and graphics inspired by Pokemon Emerald. The Pokemon side of the gameplay is also great, with an additional 60 Pokemon from Generations 2 through 4, as well as movesets updated to Generation 5. So not only will you have extra options for your team, but unlike the original Kanto games, they'll actually learn useful attacks as well. And of course, every Pokemon previously only available through Trade Evolution can now be obtained using a new Evolution Stone, or just by leveling up. As for the difficulty, it's admittedly all over the place. Most fights you'll find to be really easy, but a few are placed right after another, leaving you with no time to heal or prepare for the second. For most people, this might be a bit of an annoyance, but I personally found it to be more interesting and realistic. Overall, Dark Violet is arguably the best way to play through Kanto, with good storytelling, region upgrades, and Pokemon battles. Now, reaching this point in the video, I'm sure you're wondering, where's Radical Red? It is a Kanto game, so shouldn't it be on this list? Well, not exactly, because while I don't think it's a bad ROM hack, it doesn't necessarily improve the Kanto experience. Rather, fill it with tons of features and use it as a base for its difficult battles and huge Pokemon variety. When I play a Kanto game, I kind of want to be limited to mostly Gen 1 Pokemon, or if you're going to shake up the deck significantly, at least do the same to the region, graphics, or story. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video, and let me know in the comments what your favorite Kanto ROM hack is. Be sure to subscribe, and of course, have a nice rest of your day.